أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرفهم أجمعين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين. يا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: إن لقتل الحسين حرارة في قلوب المؤمنين لن تبرد أبدا. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear brothers and sisters, dear mu'mineen wa mu'minat, Salamun Alaikum wa Rahmatullahi wa Barakatuh. We have in our narrations a very interesting incident. An incident of pitching the tent of Azza and commemorating the martyrdom of Hussein ibn Ali in the household of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. It is narrated in Bihar that when the poet, the famous Shia poet and the lover and follower of the Ahlul Bayt, Di'bal al-Khuzai, a few nights back we had remembered him as well. Di'bal says that I went to see my master Imam Raza alayhi salatu wassalam. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli Muhammad. I went to see my master Imam Raza during the days of Muharram. And when I went to see him in his house, he was seated and his ashab, his companions, were around him, and all of them appeared somber and grieving, just as we are directed to be and supposed to be during these days, laughing less and grieving more. So they were seated there, and when Imam Raza saw me, he knew me, he recognized me, he welcomed me, and he sat me down beside him. He sat me down beside him. And he introduced me to the others, and he said a few words of praise about me, and then he addressed me directly, and he gave me a command. He ordered me to do something. He said, Ya Di'bal, Irthil Hussein. O Di'bal, recite a marsiya for Hussein. Recite a poem of lament and grief for Hussein. فَأَنْتَ نَاصِرُنَا وَمَادِحُنَا مَا دُمْتَ حَيًّا. Certainly you are among our helpers and among those who praise us for as long as you are alive. This is what you will be, our helper and one who praises us. And then he says, فَلَا تُقَصِّرْ عَنْ نَصْرِنَا مَسْتَطَعْتَ. O Di'bal, be careful, look out, watch out. Do not fail in performing your duty to help us for as long as you are alive. For as long as you are alive. Di'bal is accorded all this respect. He is given this importance in that gathering of the companions. And then he is asked to recite a marthiya, for Hussein, and on account of this, he is awarded the title of the helper, the praiser of the Ahlul Bayt, and he is asked to help the Ahlul Bayt for as long as he can. These are very honorable titles. For the Imam to call a person Madihuna, Nasiruna, you are our Nasir and helper. Sit down beside me, the most elevated and important place in that gathering. Dear brothers and sisters, what did Debal do? What was the service that Debal provided? Dear brothers and sisters, Debal was a poet. He used to recite poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt, increasing people's ma'rifah about the Ahlul Bayt through his poetry, increasing their emotional connection with the Ahlul Bayt through his poetry. He was not a military commander, a political leader, or anything of those. There were other people who used to carry out those roles for the Ahlul Bayt, and they were important in their own ways. But a person who, like Debal, being a poet of the Ahlul Bayt, he was a person who played an important and central role in gatherings such as this. And this narration helps us understand the significance of these gatherings a little better. A person who plays an important role in such gatherings reaches a station where the Imam asks him to sit next to him and awards him and speaks to him and addresses him with the title of Nasiruna. You are our helper. Dear brothers and sisters, these gatherings, such as tonight, the nights that have passed, and these nights are passing by very quickly. I just realized that of these 10 days, half of it is over now. These nights that have passed by, these nights that are still to come, inshallah, and these gatherings, these morning assemblies that we have, these are very important. We are pitching the tent of Aza on the orders of the Ahlul Bayt, on the orders of Imam Hussain, on the orders of Imam Raza, on the orders of all the Ahlul Bayt. We are pitching this tent, but it is they who have commanded us to do it. And by organizing and participating in these gatherings, we are trying to get to that position where we ourselves can be addressed as Nasiruna, inshallah, as helpers of the Ahlul Bayt, inshallah. I'd just like to draw our attention to one aspect of these gatherings. Sometimes, dear brothers and sisters, when we are very familiar with someone or something, we tend to develop some blind spots about them. You must have noticed this frequently. When we have someone in our family, someone staying in our house, our brother, our sister, sometimes we fail to notice certain aspects of their personality that others are able to notice very well. You must have noticed this. You must have seen this happen with you. Somebody else, another friend, a distant relative will say, your brother has, for example, will say, your brother has an extraordinary ability to resolve differences. And you'll think about it and you'll say, he's right. He does have this extraordinary ability, but I never thought about it. Even though he lives with me in the same house, and I've seen him resolve differences between mu'mineen or family members repeatedly, but I never paid attention to it. This happens frequently. Sometimes our understanding of this important institution of Aza sometimes suffers from such blind spots. Those who are not part of this Hussaini culture, or perhaps are new to this Hussaini culture, their understanding of this model of development and community building, this model of Islahi Ummat, which is represented and embodied by these gatherings, it tends to be of this nature, They say that this is a gathering where you have a speaker, for example, you have a few people reciting poetry, for example. So there is a speaker, there is a reciter, and there is an audience. The speaker or reciter, if he performs his job well enough, the audience will acquire and gain something, and that will be a successful majlis. Frequently, this is how we define this model of grieving, simply in terms of speaker and audience, and judge its success purely on these metrics. While someone who observes this very carefully will realize that this is in fact an extremely sophisticated and complex model of development and community development. I'll just give you a couple of examples and we'll go back to Karbala. For example, this is a method of community development that engages both our head and our heart. We come here, we find answers to our questions. We find that the cobwebs in our minds are cleared away in gatherings such as this. At the same time, we find that we cry, we feel very strongly in these gatherings. And therefore, these gatherings develop our intellectual and our emotional abilities. Both sides of our personalities are developed by these gatherings. And I mentioned earlier the interaction, the consideration that we show for each other. The fact that these gatherings are usually supported and funded by our communities themselves. We train ourselves to give for a higher cause without seeking publicity, popularity. There are other gatherings perhaps where people insist, if I have donated money, my name should be up on that notice board along with the amount that I have given. But in the Hussaini culture, we have no sign of this whatsoever. It trains us to give for a higher cause while choosing to be anonymous, while staying anonymous. This trains us to be better organizers, I can say this with confidence, especially in communities that have a long history of organizing programs of aza and grieving, those Shia communities, that the average child in that community has a far greater organizational ability, far greater intellectual and analytical ability, far better communication skills than children in other communities or other families that do not have this rich cultural experience. And you may have perhaps seen this in your own families, in your own hometowns, or in your own countries if we come from other countries. This model is essentially geared towards developing a very rich and very deep culture among those who participate in it. Another aspect, by the way, in this is that this model is designed to be such that it is open to all. There is no criterion for participating in these programs, not even the criterion of being Muslim. It trains us to be open and engaged with others and trying to do the best and offering them the best. And that is why you will see that this culture, if this culture is allowed to take root and then expand into the other areas of our life, into our workspaces, into our businesses, into education, into other parts of culture, the arts, etc., into our relationships with other communities and with other countries, it can have a very positive impact wherever we go. Those of you who have been to Arba'een can well imagine what happens if this culture is allowed to expand to a larger level and rise up to a larger level. The scale at which people are able to do good during those days of Arba'in, for those of you who've seen it, is phenomenal. It is unbelievable. People who you describe, when you come back from Arba'in and you tell your friends and colleagues about what you saw, most people are not willing to believe it, that a community can be so selfless on such a large scale, so well organized on such a large scale. You know what happens in Iraq during Arba'in? All that the government does is provide basic security. Keep that road open. That's it. All these services that are provided, the food, the places to stay, when it is cold, it was the blankets, now it is all the cooling equipment, now that it is in summer. This is all done by people. This is all done by people. And others who we mentioned this to find it very difficult to believe. So the culture of Hussainiyat has this extraordinary ability to transform. And when we were speaking of transformation, I'd just like to elaborate on the point of ambition that we spoke of last night. And we saw that the Hussaini culture is a culture of immense ambition. Imam Hussain himself is an extremely ambitious person. But I think it needs a little bit of clarification that ambition has certain aspects and dimensions to it. Let me just touch upon that briefly and go ahead. Ambition, dear brothers and sisters, can be looked at or studied on at least two axes, two aspects. One is the what of ambition. What is it that we are ambitious about? And the other is the who of ambition. Who does our ambition pertain to? Dear brothers and sisters, when we speak of what, we can be ambitious only about our material needs, or we can be ambitious about our material needs and spiritual development. And when we talk about who, our ambition can be limited to ourselves, or it can expand to include others as well, like our family members and others in our community. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam and this maktab of Aza, this culture, this Hussaini culture, presents ambition in a form that encompasses everything. There is material ambition in this. There is spiritual ambition in this. Ambition in this can take care of charity and the concerns of the needy. It can take care of our need for greater interaction and community building. And it includes everyone. Someone might say, Islah-e-Ummat excludes those who are not part of the Ummat. But when we know that Islah-e-Ummat itself is a stepping stone towards changing the world, we see that Hussaini ambition encompasses non-Muslims as well. Enormously ambitious project. And when such ambition encounters difficult situations on the ground, when this ambition encounters difficult situations on the ground, it is able to get ahead. And here we are going to speak about a particularly difficult period that the Ahlul Bayt went through in their history. And it was because of this Hussaini ambition that they were able to overcome it. Please support me with a salawat on Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allah salli ala Muhammad. Ya Allah. After the events of Karbala in the year 61 Hijri, darkness and terror ruled and dominated the Muslim lands. There was fear in every heart. The best of people were forced to reckon with this terrifying thought. And what was that terrifying thought? If this is what the ruling regime can do with the grandson of the Prophet and his family, massacre them in broad daylight, imprison his family, and parade them around from city to city, market to market, if I am to raise a voice of resistance, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my family? And this fear, this terror, led to a wave of irreligiosity in society. A wave of irreligiosity. La diniya, bedini in society. People, their iman was shaken by these events. If this is going to happen with the best of us, some people even began, their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was shaken. How can Allah allow this to happen to someone as pure as Hussein? And therefore, when our fourth Imam, as the leader of the Islamic movement, as the leader of this civilizational mission, when he returns to Medina, he is faced with a situation which he describes in the following words. We have a hadith from him in which he has says, Irtaddan nas ba'd al-Husayn. Irtaddan nas. The people became disbelievers. The people left Islam. The people forsook Islam. Ba'd al-Husayn. After Hussein, after the murder of Hussein. Illa thalatha or arba. Except for 3 or 4 people, everyone left Islam. Now, of course, when we are talking about leaving Islam, it wasn't the case that people declared that we are no longer Muslims, we have adopted X or Y faith. No, it wasn't that. People continued to claim to be Muslim. They continued to flock to the mosques, to pray, to fast, to go on Hajj. All that continued. But the spirit of Islam was lost. Its mission, it was no longer a mission for them, because we know that Islam is fundamentally a movement and a mission. And things were so bad, dear brothers and sisters, that it is narrated in various books of history that Madinatul Rasul, Madinatul Nabi, the center and the heart of the Muslim world, the home of the Ahlul Bayt, the place where the holy messenger Rasulullah was grave, his grave was there, his shrine was there, people would come there for ziyarah. This city became famous. This city became famous for music and revelry. It became famous for that. People used to travel from other cities to come to Medina so that they could take part in gatherings of sin. To take part in gatherings of sin. A new kind of celebrity culture developed in Medina. A new kind of celebrity culture. Now the famous people in the city were no longer those who were companions of the Holy Messenger. They were no longer scholars. They were no longer those who had survived important battles and fought for Islam. Now, people who were famous for their various sinful activities, including engaging in sinful forms of music and the like, they became celebrities. In fact, there is a very sad incident which is narrated here. In history, the name of this person is also mentioned. One of these celebrities based in Medina, when she decided to go on Hajj, all of Medina, including its most notable personalities, they gathered together to see her off. You can imagine hundreds, perhaps thousands of people of Medina, including its most notable personalities, the biggest names of Medina society, walking with her and her caravan so that they can see her off. And when she returned from Medina, from Mecca, after performing the Hajj, there was celebration and revelry in Medina for several days. Things got so bad, dear brothers and sisters, that our fourth Imam goes on to say that I don't know what is wrong with the people of this city. They are so busy with their activities that when I approach them and I speak to them and I counsel and advise them and I tell them, please don't engage in this sin or that sin. Please come back towards Allah. Why have you forgotten the Holy Messenger and what he taught you? It hasn't been such a long time. When I do that, when I try to do that, do you know what they do? It is narrated that he goes on to say that when I try and do this, they don't refuse. They don't say that no, this is not what happened. This is not what the Holy Messenger said. But when I, the grandson of the Holy Messenger, the grandson of Rasulullah, try to advise them, they look me in the face and they start laughing. This musibah is nothing, is no small musibah. That the Imam is trying to guide people in Medina, stopping them from sins. People are looking him in the face and laughing at him. It is in this situation that we find our Imam, the leader of the Islamic movement, in the years and the days following Medina. So what does he do? What does he do? He has an option. He can say, for example, that things are really bad. People are not willing to listen. People are not interested in improving themselves. They are interested in pursuing sins and sinning. They are laughing at me. I will go away. I will disengage. I will not speak to them. I will take my family and I will go away to Yemen, to wherever. I will go away to some other land so that I do not have to observe this painful situation and suffer all these indignities. That's one of the options that he has. But then that would be going against the Husseini culture that he represents. That would be going against the Islamic mission that he's out to do. So what we have is our fourth Imam during this time investing all his energy in rebuilding a virtuous community. How does he do this? How does he do this? In a situation where people are laughing at him in Medina. In a situation where people have been shaken by the events of Karbala and have turned towards sin and irreligiosity in great measure and in great numbers. What does he do? He starts taking a few steps. One of the fundamental things that he does, dear brothers and sisters, is that he starts to work upon people and individuals who are receptive to his message. And finding such people in Medina is difficult at that time, so he doesn't give up. He starts buying slaves. He starts buying slaves. All right? Slaves were usually people who were brought from other lands as a result of wars and conquest and usually captured, defeated soldiers. And when they were used to be brought here to Medina, our Imam can be seen frequently in the market buying slaves. He brings these slaves into his household, spends years teaching them and training them, and once they have reached a certain level of marifa and ability, we see him releasing these slaves, granting them their freedom, and directing them to go and stay in Ahwaz, in Iraq, in Yemen, and various other parts of the Muslim lands. Somebody who has been brought up in the loving household of Imam Sajjad and well developed and developed well in the various aspects of Islamic culture and Husseini culture, when he is planted in each of these cities, each of these persons, then to whatever extent that he can, goes on to create a new center and nucleus of Husseini culture in all those cities. This is an important aspect of what he does. So once again, if we link back to some of the things that we've seen before, We see this aspect of ambition playing such an important role, of not being affected by the difficulties of our times, of not being crushed by the fact that our numbers are so small, we hardly have any funds, everyone is against us, we seem to be beset by so many problems. Not being crushed and limited by these things, but going on to imagine and dream on a large scale, and then of course backing that up with solid action as well, backing up those dreams with solid action as well. So we have this example from our fourth Imam, which shows how the movement of Karbala continued in the years immediately following Karbala. The imamat of our fourth Imam is one of the longest periods of imamat. It lasted about 35 years, and it was an extremely difficult and challenging period. The same goes for other things that we've heard from our fourth Imam. All of us have heard, usually in the context of musibah and masaib, that after Karbala, whenever our fourth Imam was invited to eat something and food used to be placed before him, he would start crying. Whenever he was offered a glass of water, he would start crying. Whenever he would pass by the market and he would notice that an animal has been brought for sacrifice, he would start crying, and then he would go over to the owner of that animal and ask him, "Have you given him some water to drink?" Now these are all heart-rending things. They're usually narrated as part of musibah and masaib, but they contain a strategic, or they reflect a strategic intent and plan as well. A plan to keep the message of Karbala alive despite the strict conditions that have been imposed by that time. This ability that we see in this culture, in this Husseini culture, to break beyond the limitations of the present and soar up to higher goals and targets, dear brothers and sisters, then starts to be reflected in individuals who are associated with this culture. The ability to think big, the ability to take bold steps and decisions, the ability to place your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and go forward. I would like to narrate an incident that some of you may have heard before in this regard. Some of you may have heard before. This incident pertains to about 60 to 70 years ago. There was a young man, a poor young man. He too, like the incident that I narrated yesterday, here was a young man who used to get by working as a tailor. And this young man was a religious young man. He used to work hard, try and meet the needs of his family. He wasn't married. He was not yet married. And then it so happened that he became acquainted with a young woman. And as frequently happens, and in itself there is no harm in it, there is nothing wrong in it, this woman developed a great affection for him and was attracted towards him. It's natural for the sexes to be attracted to each other. As long as it does not lead to sin by itself, there is nothing wrong in it, it is natural. She was greatly attracted to him. This young man, whose name was Rajab Ali, was aware of this attraction, but the circumstances and the conditions did not allow him to move this or to consider this attraction favorably and to move it towards something legitimate like marriage. And therefore, he did not respond to her attraction. This young woman, who belonged to a family much well off, much better off than he was. She belonged to a relatively powerful and wealthy family. kept pestering him, kept asking him to engage in sin with her. And this was one of the main reasons that he wasn't interested in keeping any kind of contact with her anymore. She kept pestering him and he kept refusing. This young woman then made a scheme and a plan, an elaborate plan, which led to Rajab Ali and her being alone in a house. She tricked him into coming there. There was no one else over there. And this young woman then finally told him that, look, now there is no way out. And told him, there is nobody here. Nobody will know of this. Nobody is expected to come here at all. We can lock the door and we don't need to be worried about anything at all. Rajab Ali is a young man. He's in his early 20s. And he can feel the pull of this attraction on his part as well. He can feel this. And he can see that there is no barrier to him engaging in sin at that point with this young woman. But Rajab Ali at that point focuses on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He does not limit his thoughts to the situation that he finds himself in. He does not say to himself that, look, I'm a poor man. I don't have the resources available for marriage at this time. This is an opportunity that I have. Why should I let it go? Nobody will know. I will do tawbah and istighfar later. No, he doesn't get into any of those ways of thinking. He focuses on Allah at that time and he takes a decision. He takes a decision to escape, to reject that offer of sin. And in his heart, while he is walking away from this house, he is speaking to Allah and he says, "Oh Allah, I have let go of this sin for your pleasure. Please take me under your wing and develop me into the kind of person you would like me to be." He said that in my business, in my profession, I often get into deals with other people. I will do this for you for this amount of money. Sometimes these deals are fulfilled, sometimes they are not. Let me now for once make a deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me make a deal with Him. Rajab Ali says that I did this, I said this, and I walked out of that house. And I had just stepped out of that house onto the pavement, and I could see already that when I looked around me, the faces of the human beings who were walking around me looked very different. I could now see people in their true spiritual form. This is a man, but he is walking by, but because of the excessive aggression that he has, he now looks like a wolf to me walking by. This is another man because, for example, of the greed that he has, he looks like a different kind of animal. And Rajab Ali Khayyat, as he came to be known, became one, despite the fact that he did not acquire any sort of formal education. Because of this ability, because of this ambition that he had, because of this courage to take a big decision where it's required, Rajab Ali Khayyat became one of the leading spiritual guides in Tehran of his time. And for decades, people would flock to him for spiritual guidance. And he guided a large number of people in this field. And his grave is now, those of you who have been there or are planning to go there, make sure to visit his grave. It is in Shahr-e-Rai, just behind the grave of Sheikh Saduq in Shahr-e-Rai, which is a suburb of Tehran today. Dear brothers and sisters, this matter of ambition and high targets is extremely important. It is extremely important. Because what we are setting out to do as part of this Husseini mission is in itself extremely important. It is narrated from the sixth Imam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala salli. It is narrated from the sixth Imam that when his companion Fuzail came to see him, Imam Sadiq asked him, Ya Fuzail. He greeted him, he welcomed him, and then he asked him a question. It seems it was the first important thing that he asked him. He said, O Fuzail, atajlisun wa tuhaddithun? Do y'all, and here we know from the context what he means is, do you Shia? Atajlisun wa tuhaddithun? Do you sit down together and do you narrate our ahadith? And do you narrate the events of the Ahlul Bayt and the musibah of the Ahlul Bayt, gatherings such as this one or other gatherings? Do you do that? Fuzail replies, Naam, ju'iltu fidak. Of course, my Lord. Of course, my master, we do that. We Shia, we gather together and we narrate ahadith to each other and we remind each other of the position and status of the Ahlul Bayt and the trials and tribulations and sufferings that they have undergone. We do all that, of course. Imam Sadiq in response says, Inni uhibbu tilkal majalis. I love these gatherings. I love these. Inni uhibbu tilkal majalis. I love these gatherings that you're describing to me, that you're speaking about. And then he goes on to order Fuzail, and through Fuzail, all of us. He says, keep gathering like this. Keep gathering like this. فَأَحْيُوا أَمْرَنَا. فَأَحْيُوا أَمْرَنَا. Gather like this and enliven our matter. Dear brothers and sisters, our books of narration and ahadith on several occasions have this concept of Ihya Amr. Ihya Amr. Ihya Amr, which is translated as enlivening the matter, enlivening the topic. What is this topic? And what is enlivening it? Inshallah, we'll speak about this a little more in the coming nights, but its essence, I will just simply introduce you to the essence of this issue. Scholars have come to the conclusion, based on all the various available information in this regard, that ahadith such as this one, where we are ordered to gather or to perform other actions, all of them targeted towards Ihya Amr, are in fact directing us towards establishing the authority of the Ahlul Bayt in the world. Establishing their authority. Authority as moral leaders, as spiritual leaders, as leaders of ilm, and further as well. And inshallah we will touch upon this in the coming days and night. Dear brothers and sisters, on the day of Ashura, when all the companions had sacrificed themselves, when all the Bani Hashim had shed their blood in defense of their Imam, and it was just among the men, it was only Imam Hussein who was left alive. It is said that he stepped away, some distance away from the tents, and facing the desert, facing the blowing winds, he called out at the top of his voice, Hal min nasirin yansuruna? Is there anyone to help us? Hal min mughithin yughithuna? Is there anyone to assist us? Hal min dhabbin yadhubbu an harami Rasulullah? Is there anyone to defend the household of the Holy Prophet? He called this out. And the narrations say that there was a clamor from the tents. A great sound arose from the tents of ladies wailing and crying and screaming. Imam Hussain rushed back towards the tents and he called out to his sister, "O Zainab, what is the matter? Why are the ladies grieving and crying in this fashion? Hussain is still alive. Hussain is still alive." And Lady Zainab answered, "Oh brother, you have no idea what happened. You have no idea what happened. We heard, all of us heard your call for help, and little Ali Asghar turned and fell down from his cradle." Imam Hussain says, "Nawilini waladi as-saghir, give me my young child, give me my infant to me." Imam Hussain is holding this tiny baby in his arms. He puts him inside his abba, inside his robe, to shield him from the sun perhaps. And then he starts walking, striding purposefully towards the enemy. The enemy can see him coming. The enemy knows everybody else has been martyred. It is now just Hussain. And they were expecting Hussain to come to battle with his sword drawn, but he's coming with hiding something in his robe. Perhaps the enemy might have wondered. Perhaps he may have thought, maybe Hussain has finally decided to give up. Now that everybody else is dead, maybe he's lost the nerve to fight. Na'udhu billah. Maybe he's carrying a copy of the Quran, will place it before us and then invite us to some kind of an agreement or peace talk. But they simply have no idea, dear brothers and sisters. They have no clue. They have no clue and no idea that Hussain is about to strike a blow upon them, the likes of which has not been struck as yet that day. Imam Hussain comes and stands in front of this army. And before anyone can figure out what's happening, he brings out his infant and he turns his face towards the army and he says, "Ya qawm, in lam tarhamuni farham hadit tifl as-saghir. Ama tarawna kayfa yataladha atshana." Oh, people who are watching me, if you do not have any feelings for me, at least have mercy on this tiny infant. Don't you see how he is moving his dry lips in thirst? Dear brothers and sisters, there is a word in this, and you would have heard this before as well. There is a word, yataladha, in this hadith. The word talazzi. The ulama say, talazzi has a very specific meaning. Talazzi is a particular kind of movement of the lips, and they say that when you want to understand, if you want to understand what talazzi is, and what Imam Hussain meant when he said, Kaifa yataladha, think of a fish. When a fish is taken out of the water, what does a fish do? It flaps around furiously from side to side. And then after some time, its flapping becomes slower and milder and slower still, until it reaches a point when this fish no longer has any energy to flap around. It's lying there on the floor, its eyes wide open, simply opening its mouth and closing its mouth, opening its mouth and closing its mouth. They say if you want to know what yataladha means, imagine this fish. This is what Imam Hussain is talking about. Imam Hussain does this. Imam Hussain does this and throws the army into disarray, throws his enemy into disarray. The soldiers, the enemy soldiers are left wondering, are we on the right path? Are we doing the right thing? This is not why we came here. Are we ready to inflict such suffering and misery on little children? What should we be doing? The commander Umar ibn Saad begins to sense trouble. He knows that even though everyone else has died in Hussein's army, this little child can turn the tables even now. He senses rebellion in the air. He motions to his loyal and hard-hearted warrior Hurmala and says, Iqta kalam al-Hussein. Stop Hussein from speaking. Hormala understands this signal. He knows what he must do. He picks up his bow. He puts a large arrow into it, stretches his bow, and lets this arrow fly towards its destination. Dear brothers and sisters, this arrow went and struck Ali Asghar. I wish, dear brothers and sisters, I could say that it pierced Ali Asghar's neck, but unfortunately I can't, because the Maqtal said, فَذُبِحَ الطِّفْلُ مِنَ الْأُذُنِ إِلَى الْأُذُنِ. The infant was slaughtered from one ear to the other ear by this arrow. Imam Hussein cups his hands, gathers the blood of this infant in his hands. He wants to pour it onto the ground, but it is said that he heard a voice that said, "Oh Hussein, if you pour this blood onto the ground, not a single blade of grass will ever grow on the earth." He wants to throw it up towards the sky. He hears a voice, it is narrated, that says that if you throw this up, this sky will never shed a single drop of rain. He smears the blood on his face and says, "O Rasulullah, I will meet you in this condition on the day of judgment and complain to you about what your ummah has done with me and your household." La hawla wa la quwwa illa billahi al-ali al-azim. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم صل